You know that moment when someone crosses a line so far that you can actually feel your blood pressure spike? That's exactly what happened when Margaret Whitmore, our HOA president, decided my service dog was just a pet and took matters into her own hands with a bottle of pepper spray. What she didn't know was that I'm a disabled veteran with PTSD, and Max isn't just my companion. He's my lifeline. And what Margaret really didn't know was that attacking a service animal isn't just cruel. It's a federal crime that comes with some very serious consequences. Before we dive in, let me know where you're watching from today. My name is John Dale, and I never thought I'd be the guy fighting an HOA. After 2 tours in Afghanistan, I figured the hardest battles were behind me. I was wrong. Sometimes the enemy lives right down the street and carries a clipboard instead of a rifle. I moved to Willowbrook Gardens 3 years ago, specifically because it was quiet and the HOA rules seemed reasonable. What I didn't anticipate was Margaret Whitmore becoming president 6 months later and turning the place into her personal kingdom. Margaret was one of those people who'd never worked a real job but somehow believed she was qualified to micromanage everyone else's life. The first sign of trouble came when she started questioning Max. Max is my PTSD service dog, a golden retriever trained to detect anxiety attacks, provide deep pressure therapy, and help me navigate crowded spaces. He's not just well trained, he's literally saved my life, more times than I can count. "Mr. Dale," Margaret cornered me one Tuesday morning as I was getting my mail, "I need to see documentation for that animal." "His name is Max," I replied calmly, "and I provided all required documentation when I moved in." She flipped through her papers dramatically. "I don't see any emotional support animal permits here." "Because he's not an emotional support animal. He's a service dog. There's a difference." Margaret's face pinched like she'd tasted something sour. "Well, I'm going to need you to keep him on a shorter leash. Mrs. Henderson complained that he startled her yesterday." I knew Mrs. Henderson. She was actually one of the few neighbors who always stopped to pet Max and ask how I was doing. I think there might be some confusion. "No confusion," Margaret snapped. "I am implementing new pet policies. All animals must be leashed within 6 feet of their owners at all times. No exceptions for outdoor common areas, and absolutely no animals in the clubhouse." "Ma'am, service dogs are protected under the ADA. These restrictions would be illegal." Her eyes narrowed. "We'll see about that." Over the next few weeks, Margaret's campaign against Max escalated. She started following us on our walks, measuring the length of his leash with a literal tape measure. She'd show up whenever Max and I were at the community mailbox, timing how long we stayed. She even had the audacity to approach other residents, asking them to file complaints about Max. Most of my neighbors saw right through her nonsense. Tom Rodriguez from Unit 47 actually started documenting her harassment with his phone. "This is ridiculous, John. That dog is better behaved than most people's kids." But Margaret had a few allies, primarily other board members who were either too intimidated to stand up to her or genuinely believed her version of events. At the monthly board meeting, she presented what she called evidence of Max being a public nuisance. "This so-called service dog," she announced to the room, "has been observed off-leash multiple times in violation of county ordinances." I stood up in the back of the room. "That's because service dogs are legally allowed to be off-leash when performing their duties. Yesterday, Max detected one of my panic attacks before I even realized it was happening. If he'd been restricted by a 6-foot leash, he couldn't have done his job." "Your alleged panic attacks are not this community's responsibility," Margaret shot back. "If you can't control your pet—" "He's not a pet," I interrupted. "And what you're doing is disability discrimination." The room went quiet. You could feel the tension thick as fog. Margaret's face turned red, but she composed herself quickly. "This board doesn't discriminate against anyone," she said slowly. "We simply enforce rules equally." That's when I knew she was going to escalate this further. I've dealt with enough bullies to recognize when someone's about to double down instead of backing off. What I didn't expect was how far she'd actually go. 3 days later, I got a certified letter in the mail. It was a formal notice of HOA violation, claiming Max had been menacing residents and demanding I either provide proper restraint or face fines starting at $200 per day. I called my lawyer that afternoon. "John," attorney Sarah Chen said after reviewing the letter, "this is textbook disability discrimination. We can fight this, but I need you to start documenting everything. Every interaction, every violation notice, every conversation. Can you do that?" "I'm already on it," I told her, pulling out a notebook I'd been keeping since Margaret's first complaint. Military training comes in handy sometimes. What I didn't tell Sarah was that my documentation was about to become a lot more crucial than either of us imagined. The next few weeks felt like psychological warfare. Margaret had clearly decided that if she couldn't force me out through official channels, she'd make my life so miserable that I'd leave voluntarily. She stationed herself at her front window, which had a direct view of my unit, and would come outside with her phone whenever Max and I appeared. Day 14 of harassment documentation, I dictated, into my phone recorder one morning. Margaret Whitmore emerged from her unit at 7:23 a.m. as Max and I began our morning walk. She followed us for approximately 12 minutes, taking photos and video, maintaining a distance of roughly 20 feet. Max, bless him, seemed to understand we were under surveillance. His training kicked in, and he stayed closer to me than usual, occasionally glancing back at Margaret with what I swear was doggy disdain. The breakthrough came during what should have been a routine trip to check my mail. I was having a rough day, anniversary of an IED explosion that took out half my unit, and my anxiety was spiking. Max sensed it before I did, moving into position for deep pressure therapy. That's when Margaret struck. "Get that dog away from me," she shrieked, even though we were easily 15 feet apart. Before I could respond, she pulled out a small canister and sprayed Max directly in the face. The pepper spray hit him like a wall. Max yelped in pain and confusion, pawing at his eyes as he stumbled backward. My own panic attack, which he'd been trying to help me manage, exploded into full-blown rage. "What the hell is wrong with you?" I shouted, dropping to my knees next to Max. His eyes were streaming and he was whimpering in a way I'd never heard before. "That animal was threatening me," Margaret yelled back. "I have every right to defend myself." "He was performing his job. He wasn't even looking at you." Several neighbors had come out at the commotion. Tom Rodriguez was already on his phone, and I could hear him telling someone, "You need to get here now. Some lady just attacked a service dog with pepper spray." Mrs. Henderson rushed over with a bowl of water. "Oh my God, John, is Max okay?" I was trying to flush Max's eyes when Margaret made her biggest mistake. "All of you need to mind your own business," she announced to the gathering crowd. "This isn't a real service dog anyway. Look at him. He's just a pet this man uses to get sympathy and special treatment. I've researched the laws, and I know my rights." That's when I looked up at her, Max still trembling against my leg, and said very quietly, "Ma'am, you just committed a federal crime." Her face went pale, but she recovered quickly. "Don't try to intimidate me with your fake legal threats. I know exactly what I'm doing." "Do you?" "Because interfering with a service animal is a federal offense under the Americans with Disabilities Act. It carries up to a year in prison and fines up to $75,000. And, since you just assaulted my service dog in front of witnesses while he was performing his duties, you've also violated several state laws." The crowd around us had grown. People were recording now, and Margaret suddenly seemed to realize she might have overplayed her hand. He was aggressive," she stammered. "I felt threatened." "By a dog who was lying down next to his handler," Tom Rodriguez called out. "Lady, I got the whole thing on video. That dog never even looked at you." Margaret's expression shifted from defiance to something approaching panic. "You're all making a big deal out of nothing. It was just a little spray to keep him away." "Just a little spray," Mrs. Henderson stepped forward, and I'd never seen the elderly woman look so angry. "That's pepper spray, you horrible woman! Look what you did to him!" Max was still pawing at his face, though the water was helping. I could see him starting to calm down, but the damage was done. This wasn't just about HOA harassment anymore. This was assault on a disabled veteran service animal. "I'm calling the police," I announced, pulling out my phone. "Wait," Margaret said quickly. Let's talk about this rationally. Perhaps we can work something out. I'll withdraw the violations and we can forget this whole misunderstanding." "This wasn't a misunderstanding," I replied, already dialing. "This was a crime, and it's going to be reported as one." The next 20 minutes were some of the longest of my life. Max gradually recovered from the pepper spray, though he stayed pressed against my leg, whether for my comfort or his, I couldn't tell. Margaret retreated to her unit, but I could see her pacing behind her windows. When Officer Martinez arrived, I could immediately tell he was taking this seriously. He'd clearly dealt with service animal cases before. "Sir, I need you to walk me through exactly what happened," he said, pulling out his notebook. I gave him a detailed account, while Tom shared his video footage. Mrs. Henderson provided her witness statement, and 2 other neighbors who'd seen the incident came forward as well. "Ma'am," Officer Martinez said when Margaret finally emerged from her unit, "I need to speak with you about the incident with the service dog." "It wasn't an incident," she replied stiffly. "It was self-defense against an aggressive animal." Officer Martinez looked at his notes, then at Tom's video on his phone. "Ma'am, the video evidence shows the dog was lying down next to his handler when you approached and deployed pepper spray. There's no indication of aggressive behavior from the animal." "I felt threatened," Margaret insisted. "By a service dog performing its duties?" Officer Martinez's voice carried a note of disbelief. "Ma'am, are you aware that interfering with a service animal is a federal crime?" And that's when I saw it. The exact moment Margaret realized she was in serious trouble. Margaret's face went through a series of expressions: confusion, denial, and finally, cold fear. You could practically see the wheels turning as she tried to calculate her way out of this situation. "Federal crime," she repeated slowly. That's ridiculous. I was protecting myself from an aggressive animal." Officer Martinez consulted his notes again, then looked at Tom's video one more time. "Ma'am, I've reviewed the witness statements and video evidence. The service dog was lying down next to his handler and showed no aggressive behavior. You approached them and deployed pepper spray without provocation." "Without provocation?" Margaret's voice pitched higher. "This man has been violating HOA rules for months. That animal has been menacing residents, going off-leash, disturbing the peace." "Ma'am," I interrupted, "none of those are crimes. What you did is—" Officer Martinez nodded. "Sir, you mentioned this is your PTSD service dog?" "Yes, sir. Max is trained to detect panic attacks and provide deep pressure therapy. He was actually in the middle of helping me manage an anxiety episode when she attacked him." "And you have documentation of his service animal status?" I pulled out my phone and showed him the photos of Max's certification, training records, and veterinary documents. "Everything's been properly filed with the HOA since I moved in." Officer Martinez reviewed the documents, then turned back to Margaret. "Ma'am, interfering with a service animal is a violation of federal law under the Americans with Disabilities Act. It's also a state crime under California Penal Code 365.7. I'm going to need to place you under arrest." The color drained from Margaret's face completely. "Under arrest? For what?" "Willful injury to a service dog, interfering with a service animal in performance of duties, and disability discrimination. You have the right to remain silent." As Officer Martinez read Margaret her rights, I knelt down next to Max, who was finally starting to seem like himself again. His eyes were still a bit red, but his tail gave a tentative wag when I scratched behind his ears. "You okay, buddy?" I whispered. He leaned into me, and I felt that familiar calm that comes from his presence. Even after being attacked, he was still trying to do his job. The arrest sent shockwaves through the community. Within hours, word had spread to every unit in Willowbrook Gardens. My phone started ringing with neighbors calling to check on Max and offer support. "John, it's Patricia from Unit 23, one voicemail said. "I just heard what happened. I want you to know that Margaret has been harassing other residents too, and we're ready to speak up if you need witnesses." Another message came from Dave Chen in Building C. "Hey man, I'm a lawyer. Family law. Not criminal. But I know people. Call me if you need help." But the most surprising call came from someone I'd never met. "Mr. Dale, this is Rebecca Santos from Channel 7 News. We've received reports about an HOA president attacking a veteran service dog. Would you be willing to speak with us?" I wasn't sure about going public, but after talking with Sarah Chen, my lawyer, we decided it might actually help the case. The more documentation and public awareness we have, the better, she explained. HOA disability discrimination cases can be tricky because boards often claim they're just enforcing rules equally. But this is clear-cut assault on a service animal. The news segment aired 2 days later. Watching Margaret's mugshot appear on screen while the anchor described federal charges for attacking a PTSD service dog was surreal. The reporter, Rebecca Santos, had done her homework. Veterans with service dogs face unique challenges when it comes to housing discrimination, she explained to the camera. Federal law provides strong protections for service animals, but enforcement often depends on victims being willing to speak up. The community response was overwhelming. I came home from the grocery store to find a gift basket on my doorstep with dog treats for Max, and a card signed by 12 different neighbors. Tom Rodriguez started a petition demanding Margaret's removal from the HOA board, which collected over 40 signatures in less than 24 hours. But the real turning point came when I received a call from Detective Lisa Chang with the district attorney's office. "Mr. Dale, we're moving forward with charges against Miss Whitmore, but during our investigation, we've uncovered some additional information you might find interesting." "What kind of information?" "It appears Miss Whitmore has been using her position as HOA president to selectively enforce rules and potentially embezzle community funds. We found records of violations being dismissed for board members and their families, while other residents faced maximum penalties for identical infractions." My blood pressure spiked. "She's been stealing from the community?" "We're still investigating, but it looks like she's been authorizing payments to her own landscaping company for work that was never completed. We're talking about potentially tens of thousands of dollars over the past 2 years." Suddenly, Margaret's obsession with targeting me made more sense. She had been running her own little corruption scheme, and a disabled veteran with a service dog was an easy scapegoat to deflect attention from her real crimes. "Detective, what does this mean for the case?" "It means Miss Whitmore has bigger problems than just the service dog assault. But it also means your case just became part of a much larger investigation into HOA fraud and abuse of power." That evening, as I sat on my patio with Max at my feet, I reflected on how quickly everything had changed. 3 weeks ago, I was just a guy trying to live quietly with his service dog. Now, I was at the center of a federal criminal case that was exposing years of corruption. Max looked up at me with those wise brown eyes, and I could swear he understood exactly what we'd been through together. "You did good, buddy," I told him. "You did real good." He wagged his tail once and went back to watching the sunset. Whatever came next, we'd face it together. The preliminary hearing was set for 3 weeks later, but Margaret's legal troubles were just beginning. Detective Chang's investigation had uncovered what prosecutors were calling a systematic pattern of abuse, fraud, and discrimination dating back to Margaret's first day as HOA president. I wasn't prepared for the media attention that followed. Local news picked up the story, then regional outlets, and finally it went national when a veterans' rights organization issued a statement calling for stronger enforcement of service animal protections. "This case represents everything wrong with unchecked HOA power," said Maria Gonzalez, Director of Veterans Legal Aid, during a press conference I watched from my living room. "A disabled veteran should never have to fear harassment or assault while his service dog performs life-saving duties." The community transformation was remarkable. The same neighbors who'd been quietly intimidated by Margaret for years suddenly found their voices. An emergency HOA board meeting was called, and I'd never seen the clubhouse so packed. "We demand Margaret Whitmore's immediate resignation," announced Tom Rodriguez, who'd somehow become the unofficial spokesman for the resistance. "And we demand a full financial audit of all community funds." The remaining board members looked shell-shocked. Vice President Janet Morrison, who'd always seemed to be Margaret's puppet, spoke up with a trembling voice. The board accepts Miss Whitmore's resignation, effective immediately, and we're hiring an independent accounting firm to review all financial records from the past 3 years." The room erupted in applause. Max, who'd been lying calmly beside my chair, lifted his head at the sudden noise. I reached down to reassure him, still amazed at how resilient he was after everything we'd been through. But the biggest shock came during the criminal proceedings. Margaret's lawyer had clearly advised her to take a plea deal rather than risk a federal trial. "Your Honor," said Assistant District Attorney Jennifer Park, "the defendant has agreed to plead guilty to willful injury of a service animal, interfering with a service animal in performance of duties, and embezzlement of community funds totaling $47,000. $47,000. Margaret had been stealing from her own neighbors while harassing a disabled veteran and his service dog. The irony was almost too much to process. Judge Patricia Williams looked stern as she addressed Margaret directly. "Miss Whitmore, do you understand that you're pleading guilty to both federal and state crimes?" Margaret, looking nothing like the imperious HOA president who'd terrorized the community, nodded weakly. "Yes, Your Honor." The attack on Mr. Dale's service dog was not only cruel and illegal, but it represented a direct assault on the rights of disabled Americans. Your theft from the community you were supposed to serve compounds the severity of your actions. The sentence was more than I'd expected. 18 months in federal prison, 3 years probation, full restitution of the stolen funds, plus penalties, and a lifetime ban from serving in any HOA leadership position. Margaret would also have to complete 200 hours of community service at a veterans organization. But the most satisfying moment came after the sentencing, when Detective Chang pulled me aside. "John, I wanted you to know that your case has prompted the State Attorney General to launch a broader investigation into HOA abuse. What happened to you wasn't isolated, and your willingness to fight back is helping other victims come forward." 6 months later, Willowbrook Gardens was a different place. The new board, led by Tom Rodriguez as president, had implemented transparent financial reporting and established a resident rights committee. The Margaret rules were all repealed, and the community actually felt like a community again. Max and I were taking our evening walk when Mrs. Henderson approached us with a smile that lit up her whole face. "John, I wanted to thank you," she said, kneeling down to pet Max. "I know fighting back wasn't easy, but you saved this place. Margaret was making everyone's life miserable, not just yours." "I just did what needed to be done," I replied. Max deserved better than being attacked for doing his job. "You both deserve better," she said firmly. "And now we all have better." As we continued our walk, I reflected on how much had changed. The anxiety attacks that had plagued me since Afghanistan were becoming less frequent, partly because I no longer lived in a constant state of stress and harassment. Max seemed happier too, more relaxed and confident during our daily routines. The legal victory was satisfying, but the real win was the community that emerged from Margaret's downfall. Neighbors who'd been isolated by fear and intimidation were now organizing barbecues, starting a community garden, and looking out for each other. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah Chen, my lawyer. "John, just got word that the state has added HOA service animal protection language to the new housing discrimination bill. Your case made the difference. Proud to have represented you." I looked down at Max, who was contentedly sniffing around a tree, completely focused on whatever fascinating scent he'd discovered. He had no idea he'd become the face of a movement, the catalyst for legislative change, the reason other service dog handlers would face less discrimination in the future. "Come on, buddy," I said softly. "Let's head home." As we walked back toward our unit, passing neighbors who waved and smiled instead of glaring and complaining, I realized that Margaret Whitmore had done something she never intended. By attacking Max, she'd exposed her own corruption and given our community the chance to become what it was always supposed to be. The sunset painted the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, and for the first time in years, I felt genuinely at peace. Max glanced up at me with those wise brown eyes, his tail wagging gently, and I knew he felt it too. We'd won more than a legal case. We'd won our home back. They thought they'd broken me. They were wrong. Follow to see what they try next.